Hi, and welcome to the Stowe Bag video sew along. In this series of instructional videos, I'll be walking you step by step through the process of sewing up your own Stowe bag. This video series is the second in collaboration with Fringe Supply Co. So if you're joining us from there, welcome back. In case this is your first Grainline sew along, let me introduce myself. I'm Jen, the owner and founder of the Grainline Studio line of sewing patterns. After sensing a hole in the garment pattern market, I launched my first sewing pattern in 2011, which grew into the company I have today. I have a passion for sewing and education, and I'm so happy I get to share it with you all. Now for how this sew along will work. All of the videos are free and will live permanently on our YouTube channel. This means you can watch them and rewatch them when it's convenient for you. I'll be sewing the entire bag through with you over the course of the 7 videos in this series, so you'll be able to see exactly how I handle each step of the process. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment below the video and I'll do my best to answer it. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about the Stowe bag. The Stowe was actually the first project bag designed by Fringe Supply Co. long before the field bag entered the world. It's a great little bag, but the construction proved too costly for small manufacturing, so Karen reached out to me about turning it into a pattern. It was such a fun process working together, and I absolutely love how the bag turned out. Not only is it a perfect project bag, it's available in 2 sizes, which are perfect for things like lunch, groceries, and more. Now let's talk about the design. The Stowe comes in 2 sizes, small and large. The small bag is perfect for smaller knitting projects, toting your lunch to work, and sweaters knit in pieces. The larger bag easily fits a full in-the-round sweater project, multiple smaller stows or field bags, groceries, etc. Between these two, there's a size for everything. Like the field bag, the Stowe features side pockets for tools, patterns, and notebooks. You can see here the stitching for the large pocket, a smaller pocket, and then 2 smaller pockets and a space for pens or needles. I like to bring a large Stowe as my carry-on when I travel. Inside I can pop a field bag or a smaller Stowe. You can see here. A sweater if it's chilly, my iPad for the pattern, and it still leaves plenty of room for snacks and anything else you would need on a flight. Now that we've discussed the details of the bag, let's talk about what you're going to need to make it. In order to sew up your own Stowe bag, the first thing you're going to need is the pattern. The pattern is available in both printed and PDF formats in our shop. You can find a link to purchase it if you haven't already in the description below. For the Stowe, we recommend using medium weight woven fabrics. So for those of you who struggled a bit with the thickness of the field bag, that should be welcome news. Fabrics like denim, heavyweight linen, twill, and canvas are perfect and will give your bag the body it needs to function. I'll be using the same 6-ounce canvas that I used to sew up my field bag, but here are a few Stows made up in different fabrics so you can see how they behave. Here we have a large Stowe made in a railroad lightweight denim. This is probably about 8 ounces. You can see it has some body. It stands up on its own with another bag and I have a shirt and another bag in here. And it does stand up on its own. It's not too heavy, and it's just a nice fabric. It really sets off the shape of the bag nicely. So here we have the large Stowe made up in a Robert Kaufman Brussels washer. It has the same shirt and small Stowe inside of it. So here you can see it doesn't really stand up on its own. So if you're looking for a bag that'll smush down, you can easily make it small and put it into another bag, but you still need a large size. Something like this would be a great option. This small Stowe here is made of 8-ounce canvas. You can see it stands up on its own. It has 1 sweater project inside of it. And it's really nice. You could easily knit out of this with it standing. The handles won't get in your way. It's really nice. You can also walk around with it on your wrist and knit out of there. I do that sometimes, just knit right through this hole. So this is a great option. Again, this is just an 8-ounce generic canvas. Here we have a small stow made up in a 6-ounce canvas. You can see it's a little floppier than the 8-ounce canvas, but a lot of the great prints made by the quilting fabric companies, they're 6-ounce, so I wanted to make sure you could see this. I'm also using one for my bag. So it is, you can still knit out of it. It does collapse a little bit more, but you can also easily knit out of this one as you are walking or reach in, grab something. I really like this weight for my stows personally. And also, again, great prints, and you can do some really fun things with the binding. Then finally, we have one made up in Brussels washer. Again, you can see just how much that collapses. So if you need, again, a bag that's going to scrunch up, go into another bag, you don't want it to take up a lot of space, lighter weight fabric is a great option. I also like doing this weight for gifts. You can tie them up like this. I just think they look really cute. Wrap a little gift in there, and then they also get a functional bag as the wrapping. So those are some options for you to consider when picking your fabric. For our stows, we used a 100% polyester all-purpose thread in a color that matches the fabric. We tested a heavier thread and found that it was difficult for all of our machines to create an even stitch on the front and back. As you can see here, due to the way the pockets are stitched, the bobbin thread will show on the outside of your bag. So you want to make sure whatever thread you end up using produces a nice even stitch on both sides of your fabric. To finish the handles of your bag, you'll need bias binding. The amount will depend on which bag size you're making. Here you can see the bias binding finishes the handles. You can use pre-made bias binding, or you can make your own. Making your own gives you more flexibility in the color options, but either is just fine. If you feel like making your own is just adding an extra complicated step to this bag that you're already nervous about making, just buy some pre-made 1/4-inch bias. I'll also be walking you through making your own binding later in this series if you do decide to go that route. Pretty much any pins you have laying around are going to work just fine as long as they're an appropriate size for your fabric. From left to right here, we have clover flower head pins, glass head pins, and standard dressmaker pins. Any of these options are great, but if you predict getting your iron near the pins, say for the bias binding, I would recommend going with the glass head or standard pins, as plastic pin heads can melt. For the stow, you'll need a sewing machine needle that matches your fabric's weight. Since there are many different weights of fabric that work with the bag, it's hard to definitively recommend one as the best needle to use. I'll be using an 80/20 needle for my 6-ounce canvas bag. If you're unsure which needle is right for your fabric, do some testing on scraps of your fabric and the thread you're using to fine-tune your selection and make sure you've got a great stitch. I love my 1/4-inch foot because of the accuracy it provides, but I recommend using whatever you're used to for the bulk of this project. There are a few seams where I find my edge stitching foot helpful, especially when applying the binding. An edge stitch foot has a guide down the center of the foot that aligns with the edge of your fabric and helps you stitch an even distance from that edge. I'm not much of a rotary person, so these are the scissors I find most useful for almost every project I make. My Ginger bent-handled shears, I use these to cut out my fabrics, snip, clip, and more. I use embroidery scissors to grade my seam allowances and any other fine trimming I may need to do. Thread snips live next to each of my machines at all times. I couldn't sew without them. Finally, I have a pair of Weiss scissors that I use for paper to cut out my pattern. You want to make sure that you don't use your fabric scissors to repeatedly cut out paper, or it will dull them very quickly. If you're most comfortable with a rotary cutter, you'll need one of those and a fresh blade to cut through your fabric, as well as a mat to put underneath. Having an 18-inch gridded ruler handy is often helpful when laying out your pattern pieces and making sure that everything is square. You may also want a seam gauge for pressing under hems. You'll need a marking tool of some kind to trace out your pattern onto fabric. To trace the outside of the bag, you can use anything that doesn't bleed. My favorite marking tool is actually a black wing pencil. Since you're cutting off the trace line when you cut, it doesn't matter if it comes out or not. To mark the interior pocket placements and stitching lines, you'll want to use something that is not permanent. I like to use a chalk pencil. It has a fine lead that comes in multiple colors and it is washable. You'll also need an iron and ironing board. I'll be using my Laura Star Smart Eye ironing system. I'm pointing this out because I get so many questions on every video that we post. What kind of iron do you have? I really love how light this iron is, and it has an active board, which means it sucks the steam through the board, so it really sets into your fabric. Any iron and ironing board you have will be just great. You simply need something to press on and with. I also like to have a ham for this project. I find it helpful when pressing the binding of the bag since you're getting in around a 3D object. If you don't have one already, it'll really up your sewing game, so definitely consider buying one. If you're making your own bias tape, you might want to consider a bias tape maker. These are super easy to use and come in a variety of widths. You simply pull your bias strip through it while ironing the fabric, and it comes out the other side pressed. For the stow, you'll need your finished binding to be approximately 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch wide, so keep that in mind when purchasing a bias tape maker. Alright, so that is it for day 1 of the Stowe Bag Sew Along. I hope you found that information useful and you're just as excited as I am to sew up your own stow. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Our next lesson will focus on assembling and working with your pattern. I know we have some newer sewers following along, so I want to make sure we cover this. You can subscribe to our channel via the link below to make sure you don't miss any upcoming videos, and I'll see you next time.